The 1960s was a golden era of animation, bright colors, wild ideas, and characters so bizarre they could only have been dreamed up in that experimental decade. Some were hilarious, others downright unsettling, but all of them left behind a strange cultural footprint. Today, we're counting down the 15 weirdest 1960s cartoon characters you forgot existed. Milton the Monster, 1965. Milton the Monster was no ordinary cartoon hero. Created by Hal Seeger, he debuted in the Milton the Monster show as a Frankenstein-like creature brought to life in a bubbling cauldron. But unlike Frankenstein's terrifying monster, Milton was overly polite, soft-spoken, and almost childlike, a parody of horror gone adorably wrong. This odd mashup of scary and sweet made him one of the most unusual figures of 1960s television. Milton's creators leaned heavily into satire, spoofing monster movies that dominated drive-in theaters at the time. His head looked like a block of cement with bolts sticking out, but instead of instilling fear, he greeted viewers with a goofy grin. The humor worked because it flipped audience expectations. Monsters were supposed to be scary, but Milton just wanted to be friendly. The show ran only one season, yet Milton lingered in pop culture as a cult oddity. Parents appreciated its lack of violence, while kids adored the silly voices and spooky atmosphere. But censors kept a close eye. Too much grotesque imagery could draw criticism, so the series softened anything that might appear too frightening. Though forgotten by many, Milton remains a time capsule of mid-60s comedy. His character embodied a cultural moment when America was poking fun at horror tropes while trying not to terrify children in front of their brand-new color TVs. The Great Gazoo, 1965. Dropping into the Flintstones mid-series, the Great Gazoo was a character fans either loved or hated. A tiny green alien in a futuristic helmet, Gazoo crash-landed on Earth and was punished by his alien race to serve Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble. His catchphrase, calling them dum-dums, became iconic, but his very existence clashed with the prehistoric theme. Why introduce a sci-fi alien into a Stone Age sitcom? The answer lies in the 1960s obsession with space. The space race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union made outer space the ultimate fascination, and Hanna-Barbera seized the trend. Gazoo was designed to attract younger viewers who were already enamored with rockets, astronauts, and aliens. But not everyone was thrilled. Many older fans felt Gazoo disrupted the tone of the series, shifting it from a Stone Age comedy to something more absurd. Some critics accused the network of pandering too obviously to trends. Despite this, Gazoo became one of the most memorable, weird cartoon side characters of the era. Censorship wasn't an issue here, but Gazoo's inclusion represented how networks bent shows to meet cultural fads. Though his run was brief, his green figure lives on in reruns, reminding us how even the most beloved cartoons could make bizarre creative detours. Roger Ramjet, 1965. Roger Ramjet and his American Eagles was a patriotic spoof of superheroes and Cold War military culture. Roger was meant to be America's ultimate hero, except he was hilariously incompetent. Square-jawed but dim-witted, Roger relied on proton energy pills that gave him the strength of 20 men for 20 seconds. This absurd gimmick was part of what made him such a strange and unforgettable character. Created by Fred Crippen, Roger Ramjet poked fun at American propaganda and superhero cliches. His missions were often ridiculous, featuring over-the-top villains that parodied real-world fears. In a decade where patriotism was a double-edged sword, both celebrated and critiqued, Roger symbolized blind, bumbling nationalism. Kids loved the slapstick, while adults saw the sly satire. The character also reflected the censorship balance of the 1960s. Violence was exaggerated but cartoonish, with explosions and pratfalls rather than gore. The pills, while comedic, also mirrored the era's fascination with miracle drugs and quick fixes. Some critics even saw it as an unintentional commentary on a society increasingly dependent on science without questioning its ethics. Though it lasted only 156 five-minute episodes, Roger Ramjet's absurd heroism left a cultural mark. He was weird, patriotic, and totally clueless, an animated figure who captured the contradictions of the 1960s with every disastrous mission. Mcool, 1966. When Batmania swept through the 1960s, spurred by the campy Batman TV series, cartoons scrambled to create their own spies and superheroes. Enter Mcool, a bumbling secret agent with a long trench coat, handlebar mustache, and a knack for failing spectacularly. Created by Bob Kane, co-creator of Batman, Mcool was supposed to be suave like James Bond. Instead, he was a complete disaster. Every episode featured Mcool bungling his missions, foiling villains by accident rather than skill. His catchphrase, "Danger is my business," became ironically hilarious given how often he nearly got himself blown up. With villains named after absurd themes like the Owl and Jack in the Box, the show leaned into parody rather than straight adventure. Culturally, Mcool reflected the 1960s spy craze. From Bond films to The Man from UNCLE, espionage was everywhere. But Mcool flipped the trend by highlighting the ridiculousness of secret agents who always won. His incompetence mirrored public skepticism about authority figures during a decade of political unrest. While never a major hit, Mcool developed a cult following. Some critics argue it was ahead of its time, parodying tropes long before satire became mainstream in animation. Today, Mcool survives as one of the strangest cartoon spies, proof that even Batman's creator wasn't immune to weird. 1960s experimentation. Batfink, 1966. Your bullets cannot harm me. My wings are like a shield of steel. That line alone makes Batfink unforgettable. A parody of Batman and Superman, Batfink was a superhero bat with literal metallic wings. With his sidekick Karate, a stereotypical martial arts character, the show blended superhero action with absurd comedy. Batfink was strange not just for his powers, but for his design. Half bat, half crime fighter, his oversized ears and robotic wings gave him an offbeat charm. Created by Hal Seeger, the series ran for 100 episodes, offering kids a mix of slapstick and satire. The show was also a reflection of the era's superhero boom. With Batman dominating pop culture, every studio wanted its own masked crusader. But Batfink's metallic wings were a gag in themselves, always deflecting bullets, often in exaggeratedly silly ways. Censorship played a big role too. To avoid violence, Batfink never killed or seriously injured villains. Instead, they were foiled in humorous, bloodless ways. While this kept parents happy, it also made the show strangely repetitive. Critics noted that every episode boiled down to the same bullet-deflecting gag. Still, Batfink stands out as one of the weirdest superhero knockoffs of the 1960s. Quirky, campy, and oddly lovable, he remains a reminder of when animation wasn't afraid to get a little ridiculous. Deputy Dog, 1960. Deputy Dog may have started as a children's cartoon, but he became one of the strangest lawmen ever to patrol a television screen. Produced by Terry Toons, this southern-accented canine sheriff wasn't your typical heroic figure. With his slow drawl, floppy ears, and bumbling mannerisms, he was more likely to nap on the job than save the day. The show featured Deputy Dog trying to maintain order in the rural South, often clashing with mischief-making characters like Muskie Muskrat and Vincent Van Gogh. But what really made the series unusual was its tone. Unlike the frantic slapstick of Warner Brothers cartoons, Deputy Dog moved at a slower, folksy pace. That gave it a strange, offbeat charm, but also made it feel out of place next to the high-energy cartoons of its era. Culturally, Deputy Dog reflected regional stereotypes of the South during a time when America was grappling with civil rights tensions. While the show avoided overtly political content, some critics later noted its caricatured accents and exaggerated country mannerisms. Still, children of the 1960s adored it for its humor and simple storytelling. Censorship concerns came mostly from local stations rather than national watchdogs. Some broadcasters trimmed or delayed episodes that leaned too heavily into hillbilly stereotypes, fearing backlash. Despite this, Deputy Dog became an international hit, especially in the UK and Australia, where audiences found his sleepy personality quirky and entertaining. Though mostly forgotten today, Deputy Dog stands as one of the weirdest heroes of the decade, part lawman, part comic relief, and a window into how regional humor made its way into mainstream animation. Tutor Turtle, 1960. Tutor Turtle wasn't just weird, he was existential. Created by Total Television Productions, Tutor was a small turtle who constantly dreamed of living a different life. Each episode, he'd call on Mr. Wizard the Lizard, who would magically send him into a new role, whether a knight, cowboy, or explorer. Inevitably, things would go disastrously wrong, and he'd beg Mr. Wizard to rescue him with the phrase, "Help me, Mr. Wizard." What made Tutor Turtle so unusual was its deeper meaning. Beneath the comedy lay a message about being content with who you are. No matter what role Tutor tried, he was always ill-suited and clumsy. This made him one of the strangest heroes of the 1960s, a character doomed to repeat the same failures over and over again. Culturally, the show reflected the anxieties of the post-war generation. In a society obsessed with success and reinvention, Tutor's constant failures became oddly relatable. He wanted adventure, but could never escape his limitations. For kids, it was silly fun. For adults, it hinted at something darker, a critique of ambition itself. Censors didn't interfere much, but the show's repetitive failures were sometimes criticized for being too negative for young viewers. Nevertheless, its quirky catchphrases and unusual structure gave it a cult following. Today, Tutor Turtle is remembered less for his adventures and more for the haunting moral they carried. Sometimes you're just stuck being yourself. Snuffles the Dog, 1960. Snuffles wasn't a star of his own show, he was a supporting character in Quick Draw McGraw. But he was so bizarre that he deserves a spot on this list. Snuffles was a dog who demanded dog biscuits as payment for helping Quick Draw. But when given one, he didn't just eat it. He floated into the air, hugged himself in ecstasy, and descended in blissful swoons. This over-the-top reaction made Snuffles one of the strangest cartoon dogs ever animated. His exaggerated fits of joy went far beyond normal cartoon humor, pushing into surreal territory. Kids found it hilarious, while adults raised eyebrows at the oddly intense displays. The character also mirrored the 1960s growing reliance on consumer culture. Snuffles wouldn't work for loyalty or friendship. He needed a reward. That transactional relationship reflected broader cultural anxieties about greed and materialism, albeit in a comedic form. Censorship occasionally clipped his most exaggerated food, highs, with some stations worried they looked too suggestive. Still, Snuffles became a fan favorite and appeared in several episodes. Though he never carried a series, Snuffles' bizarre antics left a lasting impression. He remains a symbol of how supporting characters could sometimes outshine the eyes heroes, and how one dog's love for biscuits became one of the weirdest recurring gags of 1960s animation. The Beanie and Ceile duo, 1962. Beanie and Ceile was both beloved and bizarre. Created by Bob Clampett, the series followed Beanie, a boy with a propeller cap, and Ceile, a large green seasick sea serpent. Together, they embarked on wild adventures that blended satire, slapstick, and outright absurdity. Ceile himself was one of the weirdest characters of the era. He wasn't just a talking sea serpent. He was clumsy, sentimental, and prone to getting seasick despite living in the ocean. His design, with a goofy grin and oversized body, made him equal parts lovable and ridiculous. What set the show apart was its satirical edge. Clampett used the series to poke fun at politics, pop culture, and television itself. Characters like Dishonest John, the villain, were caricatures of shady politicians, while whole episodes parodied trends like rock music or westerns. This gave Beanie and Ceile a strange dual identity, a kids' show that doubled as adult satire. Censorship often stepped in, trimming jokes deemed too pointed or politically risky. Still, the show developed a reputation as one of the most subversive children's cartoons of its time. Cecil's odd charm and the show's bizarre humor made it unforgettable. While later reboots tried to capture the magic, nothing matched the original's weird blend of innocence and biting commentary. Colonel Bleep, 1960. Colonel Bleep holds the distinction of being the first color cartoon made for television, but its main character was also one of the strangest heroes ever conceived. A futuristic alien with a spherical head, antennas, and a rocket-powered personality. Colonel Bleep was designed as a space traveler protecting Earth from intergalactic threats. The show debuted in 1957 but carried influence deep into the 1960s when space fever was at its height. Bleep didn't talk much. Instead, he communicated through electronic noises and gestures, making him an oddly silent protagonist. Alongside his companions, Squeak the cowboy puppet and Scratch the caveman, Bleep's adventures combined past, present, and future in surreal ways. Culturally, Colonel Bleep reflected America's fascination with space exploration during the Sputnik era. But his silence also made him oddly unsettling. Viewers couldn't fully relate to him the way they could to other cartoon heroes. Censorship didn't play a major role, though the show's limited animation and abstract visuals sometimes confused younger audiences. Critics later praised it for its bold experimentation, even if it never achieved mass popularity. Today, Colonel Bleep is remembered as a historical oddity, both groundbreaking and bizarre. His strange, silent presence and futuristic look make him one of the weirdest cartoon characters to emerge from the 1960s. The Impossibles, 1966. The Impossibles were unlike any superhero team, before or since. Created by Hanna-Barbera, this trio of crime fighters doubled as a rock band, performing groovy tunes by day and battling villains by night. Their powers were as bizarre as their premise. Coil Man could stretch into springs, Fluid Man could transform into water, and Multi-Man could duplicate himself endlessly. The combination of superheroes and music wasn't random. It was aimed at capitalizing on two major 1960s crazes, comic book heroes and Beatlemania. But the result was something deeply weird. The Impossibles looked more like parody than genuine champions, with powers that often caused more chaos than good. Culturally, they reflected the decade's blending of youth culture, rock music, and mass media. Teenagers were becoming a powerful demographic, and networks wanted to capture that energy. Yet the Impossibles were never quite taken seriously. While kids enjoyed their adventures, critics dismissed them as a shallow cash-in on trends. Censorship came into play with their violent encounters. Villains and battles were toned down to avoid parental backlash, resulting in absurdly bloodless fights where enemies were subdued in comical ways. This only made the characters feel stranger, heroes with outlandish powers locked in conflicts that never carried much danger. Despite its short run, the Impossibles stand as one of the strangest superhero bands in animation history. They were brightly colored, absurdly powered, and unmistakably products of the 1960s cultural mashup. Fearless Fly, 1965. One of the strangest spin-offs of the era, Fearless Fly was a bespectacled insect who turned into a superhero whenever he put on his oversized glasses. Normally just a meek housefly named Hiram, he'd don his magical specs and suddenly gain incredible powers, soaring through the skies to fight crime. The absurdity was baked into the concept. Glasses, normally a sign of weakness or bookishness, became the source of unimaginable strength. It flipped the Superman trope on its head. Instead of removing glasses to become powerful, Hiram needed to wear them. The result was both comical and oddly inspiring. Produced as part of the Milton the Monster show, Fearless Fly's segments stood out for their sheer weirdness. The villains were equally bizarre, from mad scientists to bumbling crooks, all played for slapstick humor. Culturally, Fearless Fly reflected a society fascinated by transformation stories, from superheroes to spy gadgets. It also spoke to children who wore glasses, turning what was often a source of teasing into a symbol of strength. Censorship wasn't a major concern, though some parents complained about the show's occasional slapstick violence. For the most part, however, Fearless Fly was considered safe, just weird. Though often forgotten today, Fearless Fly remains one of the most peculiar superheroes of the 1960s, an insect with glasses that turned him into a crime fighter, forever buzzing around the edges of cartoon history. Super President, 1967. Few cartoons have aged as strangely as Super President. Premiering in 1967, this series followed the President of the United States, who moonlighted as a superhero with incredible powers. Clad in spandex, Super President could transform his body into steel, granite, water, or any material he needed to combat villains. The premise alone raised eyebrows. The 1960s were a time of deep political tension, with the Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, and scandals brewing in Washington. Against this backdrop, a cartoon suggesting that the U.S. president should also be a superpowered crime fighter felt bizarre, even satirical, though it wasn't intended that way. Culturally, Super President reflected Cold War anxieties. The president wasn't just a leader, he was America's literal shield, able to physically combat threats to the nation. Critics, however, found the concept heavy-handed and unintentionally comical. Political commentators even accused the show of trivializing the office of the presidency. Censorship added another wrinkle. Networks faced complaints that the series was too violent for children, while others argued that portraying the president as a superhuman warrior bordered on propaganda. Ratings plummeted, and the show was pulled after just one season. Today, Super President is remembered as one of the strangest political cartoons ever created. Its weirdness lies not only in the outlandish powers, but in the audacity of blending superheroes with real-world politics at the height of global tension. Wally Gator, 1962. At first glance, Wally Gator seemed harmless enough, a friendly anthropomorphic alligator in a hat and collar. But his premise was deeply odd. Wally lived in a zoo, constantly dreaming of freedom, yet every adventure ended with him being dragged back by his zookeeper, Mr. Twiddle. This repetitive formula gave the show a surreal edge. Each episode revolved around Wally's escape attempts into the city, the countryside, or even outer space, only to be foiled and returned to captivity. The humor was light, but the underlying message was strangely dark, a creature yearning for freedom but doomed never to escape. Culturally, Wally Gator reflected shifting views on captivity and individuality. While kids saw a silly gator getting into trouble, adults couldn't miss the allegory about confinement. At a time when America wrestled with ideas of liberty and social change, Wally's endless cycle struck a peculiar chord. Censors had little issue with the series, though some critics later argued its repetitive gag carried uncomfortable undertones. Was it funny or unsettling to see a character's dreams constantly denied? Though overshadowed by Hanna-Barbera's bigger hits, Wally Gator remains one of the weirdest creations of the decade. His blend of charm, futility, and quiet melancholy turned a simple zoo escapee into an oddly haunting symbol of 1960s animation. Tutor, Adam Ant, 1965. Topping the list is Adam Ant, perhaps the most bizarre superhero parody of them all. This tiny insect, clad in a helmet and boots, possessed super strength, flight, and advanced intelligence. His catchphrase, "Up and Adam, Adam Ant," was as memorable as his improbable powers. Adam Ant emerged from Hanna-Barbera's strategy of blending superhero tropes with absurd comedy. At the height of the 1960s superhero craze, a pint-sized ant with limitless powers was both hilarious and strangely captivating. His adventures ranged from battling giant robots to outsmarting bumbling villains, all while maintaining his chipper optimism. Culturally, Adam Ant embodied the contradictions of the decade. He was small yet mighty, ordinary yet extraordinary, mirroring a society where underdogs could rise to power. His insect status also lent itself to endless visual gags as he lifted objects 1,000 times his size or buzzed past larger foes. Censors largely approved of Adam Ant as the violence was cartoonishly exaggerated rather than harmful. Still, some parents questioned whether a bug superhero was too ridiculous, even for children's programming. That absurdity, however, became Adam Ant's legacy. Today, Adam Ant is remembered as a cult favorite, a hero who proved that even the tiniest creature could carry the biggest punch. His weirdness, charm, and boundless energy make him the ultimate oddball of 1960s cartoons, and the rightful #1 on this list. From metallic winged bats to superpowered ants, these forgotten 1960s cartoon characters remind us that animation has always thrived on the weird and the wonderful. If you enjoyed this dive into cartoon history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss our next countdown adventure.